What you are about to hear may not be suitable for younger listeners. This story contains disturbing details of war, death, and the unknown. Viewer discretion is advised. The valley was silent. No birds, no wind, no sound of life. The kind of silence that makes soldiers shift nervously in their gear, as if even breathing too loud might wake something sleeping in the mountains. A U.S. patrol unit of 12 men moved carefully along the narrow path, their boots crunching over loose rock. Their Afghan guide, an older man with a weathered face and sharp eyes, kept glancing over his shoulder at the cliffs above. He wasn't afraid of ambushes or Taliban fighters, he was afraid of the valley itself. "Not here," he whispered in broken English. "This place is cursed." The soldiers exchanged uneasy glances but pressed forward. Orders were orders. Intelligence had reported unusual enemy activity in this region, and the squad was tasked with scouting it. Still, they couldn't ignore the way their guide's hands trembled as he pointed toward the cliffside. Carved into the mountain was something that didn't belong. A massive stone doorway stood there, half hidden by centuries of sand and vines. It wasn't Afghan, nor Islamic, nor any style of architecture they recognized. Strange symbols were etched deep into the rock. Curling shapes, beasts with wings, and tall figures with hollow eyes that seemed to watch them. One soldier muttered, "Looks like something out of Egypt, not here." The squad leader raised his rifle and stepped closer, brushing the dust away from the carvings. His fingers paused on one in particular, a figure chained by its arms and legs, surrounded by smaller men bowing in fear. Behind him, the guide refused to come any closer. He spat on the ground and muttered a prayer under his breath. "This is not tomb," he said firmly. "This is prison, built by old ones. Your people should not enter." The soldiers exchanged smirks, some laughing nervously, but their leader's face hardened. He didn't like how the valley felt, the silence, the shadows that seemed to cling to the walls. But curiosity and military orders were stronger. "Stack up," he ordered. The team formed up at the entrance. Weapons ready, the doorway yawned like a mouth in the mountain, black and cold. For a long moment, no one moved. Then the first soldier switched on his flashlight and stepped inside. The beam cut through centuries of darkness, revealing the tunnel beyond. The air was damp, heavy with the smell of earth, and something else, something metallic like rust or blood. And just like that, they crossed the threshold. The cursed tomb had been opened once again. The tunnel swallowed them whole. Their footsteps echoed off stone walls, each sound bouncing back as if the tomb itself was listening. The farther they went, the colder it grew. Breath misted in the beams of their flashlights, drifting upward into the darkness above. "Man, it's freezing in here," one soldier muttered, hugging his rifle tighter. But it wasn't just the cold. The air felt wrong, too heavy, too still, as if the space around them hadn't been disturbed in 1,000 years and resented the intrusion. The tunnel stretched deeper until it opened into a massive chamber. The soldiers halted, their lights scanning across towering walls covered in carvings. The images weren't random decorations. They told a story, one that felt older than time itself. One wall showed figures of warriors, not Afghan, not Roman, not any culture they recognized, wielding spears tipped with flames. They battled against something enormous, a shadowy figure etched larger than the rest, its mouth filled with rows of jagged teeth. On another wall, dozens of smaller figures knelt in fear before the same beast, their faces carved with exaggerated expressions of terror. Over them towered the chained figure the squad leader had noticed outside, bound in iron-like shackles, sealed beneath mountains and symbols. "It's like they buried it alive," whispered one soldier. The carvings didn't stop there. Along the floor, strange runes spiraled outward, almost like chains of words holding the darkness in place. Their flashlights made the markings seem to twist and move, crawling across the stone as if alive. One private crouched down, tracing the edges of the symbols with his gloved finger. His voice was low, almost hypnotized. "This isn't set writing. It sets a warning." The guide, who had finally stepped just inside the entrance but refused to go deeper, shouted from behind them. His voice cracked, filled with fear. "Don't set touch. Leave it. This place is not for men." But his words came too late. The moment the soldier's finger brushed against the stone, the sound changed. A deep rumble, faint at first, pulsed through the floor beneath them. Dust rained from the ceiling. Somewhere in the dark, a sound echoed, low and guttural, like a growl from something impossibly large. The squad leader barked an order. Everyone spread out, check your sectors. Lights cut across the chamber, beams landing on more carvings, this time showing men torn apart, devoured by the beast. Figures of hunters screaming in silence, their bones left in piles at its feet. And in the very center of the chamber, half buried in rubble, was something none of them could explain. A coffin. Not wood, not stone, but a massive black slab of some metal they couldn't recognize. It pulsed faintly, as though heat still lingered inside. Strange chains covered it, bolted to the floor and walls. The soldiers froze, staring. No one wanted to move closer, but they couldn't look away. The silence pressed in heavier than before. Then, from somewhere deep beneath the chamber came a single sound. A thud, like a heartbeat. The tomb grew colder as the night deepened, though none of the soldiers could explain why. Their breath puffed white in the air. And even the glow from their lamps seemed weaker, fading into the shadows that pressed against the walls. No one dared to admit it out loud, but the longer they stayed, the more it felt like the tomb itself was breathing, inhaling their warmth, exhaling the whispers that now clung to the edges of their hearing. Private Simmons clutched his rifle so tightly his knuckles turned pale. Every few seconds he snapped his head toward the darkness, convinced he saw something move just beyond the light. The others mocked him at first, calling him jumpy, but their laughter didn't last long. One by one, they began to feel it too. The uneasy sense of eyes watching from the corners, of footsteps echoing just a moment behind their own. The carvings on the walls shifted with the flicker of their flashlights. What had looked like crude symbols during the day now resembled twisted faces, stretched mouths, and eyes carved too deep, as if staring back. Corporal Reyes swore he saw one blink. Another soldier claimed the grooves were fresh, the edges of the stone still sharp, as if carved minutes ago. No one argued, because deep down, none of them wanted to admit they were thinking the same thing. Then came the first sound. A low, guttural groan rolled through the chamber like the earth itself was speaking. The men froze. The Afghan guide outside muttered prayers under his breath, refusing to set foot past the entrance. The squad leader hissed for silence, his voice tight, his hand trembling against the grip of his weapon. The sound faded, but it left behind an awful certainty. They were not alone in this place. Time slowed. Minutes felt like hours. Some of the soldiers tried to distract themselves with routine, checking their equipment, pacing the perimeter. But the tomb didn't allow it. Every time they thought they had regained control, the darkness found new ways to crawl under their skin. A shadow too long to belong to any man stretched across the wall, then vanished when they turned. A whisper so faint it could have been the wind brushed against their ears. Except there was no wind underground. When one of the men lit a cigarette, the flames sputtered violently before being snuffed out as though sucked into the stone itself. The group exchanged horrified looks but said nothing. Words would make it real. Words would admit what none of them wanted to believe. The Afghan guide finally spoke from the doorway. His voice was low, but it carried through the stillness like a knife. "You should not have entered," he said. "The tomb does not forgive, it remembers." His eyes locked on the soldiers with pity and with fear. That was when they began to realize the truth. The tomb wasn't just a relic, it wasn't just stone and carvings, it was a predator. And now it had them inside. The silence inside the tomb didn't last. It never did. The first soldier to go missing was Private Miller. He had been stationed near the far wall, his lamp faint but steady, keeping watch like the others. One moment he was there, shifting on his boots, muttering nervously under his breath. The next, his light flickered twice, and when it came back, he was gone. His rifle lay neatly against the stone, as if he had simply set it down. But Miller would never abandon his weapon. Everyone knew that. "Move," the squad leader barked, rushing forward. The soldiers scrambled, their lights sweeping wildly across the walls, across the floor, into every crack and corner. There was no tunnel, no exit, no hole in the earth large enough for a man to vanish. and yet Miller was gone. The air grew heavier, the lamps sputtered again, weaker this time, their glow smothered by the suffocating blackness. Private Simmons swore he heard Miller's voice calling his name, faint, echoing from somewhere deeper inside the stone. But when he pressed his ear to the wall, all he heard was a low vibration, a pulse, like a heartbeat buried beneath the rock. Then came the second disappearance. Corporal Reyes, standing closest to the entrance, suddenly staggered back as if shoved by unseen hands. His scream cut through the chamber, sharp and raw, before it was swallowed in an instant. The others spun their lights on him. But where Reyes had stood, there was only dust, swirling in the still air, as though he had crumbled into nothing. His helmet clattered to the floor, rolling until it stopped at the squad leader's feet. Panic erupted. Soldiers shouted over one another, voices cracking with fear. Some tried to run toward the entrance, desperate to escape the cursed chamber. But the Afghan guide was gone, his shadow nowhere to be seen. The doorway, once clear, now seemed smaller, darker, like the tomb itself was closing in. One by one, the men realized the awful truth. They were trapped, not by stone, not by rubble, but by something older, something unseen that wanted them to stay. The whispers returned, louder this time, circling the squad like vultures. The words made no sense, not in English, not in any language they recognized, but the meaning was unmistakable. It was hunger. The tomb wanted more. And in that moment, as their flashlights dimmed to faint, trembling sparks, every man understood this was not a mission anymore. This was a curse that would not let them leave alive. The moment the second man vanished, the squad leader did what soldiers are trained to do when fear takes over. He shouted orders. His voice cut through the panic like a whip. Weapons up, form a line. The men snapped their rifles into position. Barrels trained on the shadows that seemed to crawl along the walls. Boots scraped against the stone floor, echoing unnaturally loud in the silence. The harsh clack of magazines being slammed into place rang out, the only sound of control left in that suffocating tomb. For a heartbeat, discipline pushed back against the dread. They were trained soldiers after all, men who had faced mortars, ambushes, and gunfire. But nothing in their training had prepared them for this. "Fire at anything that moves," the sergeant barked. And they did. A burst of gunfire exploded through the tomb. Muzzle flashes lit the chamber in violent bursts of orange and white, momentarily pushing back the black. The cracks of gunfire rolled like thunder, brass casings clattering to the stone. Shadows twisted wildly in the flashing light, leaping like living things, and the soldiers fired at them again and again, desperate to kill whatever had taken Miller and Reyes. When the last echoes of the shots died away, silence returned. Heavy breathing filled the chamber. A few lamps still sputtered, barely clinging to life. Smoke from the gunfire hung thick in the air, stinging their throats. The shadows retreated to their corners, untouched, unfazed. "Did we hit anything?" one soldier whispered. His voice trembled, cracking in the middle. No bodies, no blood, not even bullet marks on the walls. It was as if the tomb had swallowed every shot whole. The sergeant ordered a reload, but even as they slammed fresh magazines in, unease gnawed at them. They hadn't missed. They couldn't all have missed. It was something else, something immune. Then came the laugh. It was faint at first, a rasping, hollow chuckle that seemed to come from the stones themselves. The men froze, every barrel swinging toward the sound. But it wasn't just one laugh. It multiplied. Echoes rippled through the chamber, bouncing from wall to wall until it seemed as though dozens of unseen throats were laughing at once. The sound grew sharper, more mocking, until it cut through the men like knives. Private Simmons dropped to his knees, pressing his hands against his ears, screaming for it to stop. Another soldier shouted prayers, his voice shaking as the echoes only grew louder. The sergeant tried to steady them, barking commands, but even his voice faltered. Authority meant nothing here. They were ants in a cage, and something was enjoying the spectacle. Suddenly, Simmons' lamp went out, not flickered, not dimmed, just gone, snuffed out like a candle pinched between two fingers. His scream followed immediately, high-pitched and raw, echoing until it was cut off mid-breath. The beam of another soldier's flashlight swung wildly to where Simmons had been, but there was nothing, just his rifle, still warm, lying on the cold stone floor. 3 men gone, and the tomb wasn't finished. Desperation bled into madness. One of the soldiers hurled a grenade toward the far wall, screaming as he pulled the pin. The blast rocked the chamber, dust and stone shards raining from the ceiling. The shockwave knocked men to the ground, ears ringing, hearts pounding. Smoke and rubble filled the air, but when it cleared, the wall stood untouched, not even scorched. It was impossible. The explosion should have left marks, cracks, something. Instead, the tomb absorbed it as though it never happened. The soldiers realized with sick horror that their weapons, their rifles, their grenades, their training meant nothing. They might as well have been children throwing rocks at a hurricane. Still, adrenaline pushed them to fight. They fired again, unloading into the black corners, into the places where the whispers stirred, shell casings scattered across the floor, smoke choking the air. But again, no marks, no blood, no signs of victory. The sergeant lowered his weapon first. His face, once hard and commanding, now looked pale, eyes wide, jaw trembling. He whispered, almost to himself, "It wants us to waste it all. It sits playing with us." The words sent a chill through the squad. They all knew he was right. The tomb was alive, and it was enjoying every second of their panic. The lights dimmed further, one by one, until only 2 weak beams remained. The chamber pulsed with a rhythm none of them could ignore, like a heartbeat in the walls, slow and steady, as though the tomb itself was breathing. The men huddled closer, the barrels of their rifles shaking in their hands. Sweat trickled down faces, mixed with dust and gunpowder, stinging their eyes. Then the whispers returned. This time, they weren't just meaningless sounds. The soldiers heard their own names, spoken softly, intimately, as if whispered by a lover leaning in close. Each man heard something different: his mother's voice, his child's laughter, his wife calling from home. The sound pierced through them, twisting their hearts, dragging their minds to the surface of memory. For a moment, they forgot where they were, forgot the danger. One soldier broke, tears streamed down his face as he whispered back, begging the voice to let him go home. He dropped his rifle, stumbling into the dark, arms outstretched as if reaching for a long-lost embrace. The others screamed for him to stop, but it was too late. The black swallowed him, and the voice cut out instantly. The silence afterward was worse than the screams. The survivors stood frozen, rifles limp at their sides. They were soldiers trained to fight men, not shadows, not curses. They had no strategy, no plan, only fear. And the tomb knew it. In that suffocating blackness, as the last 2 lamps sputtered and flickered, the sergeant realized the truth. Their weapons were useless. Their courage meant nothing. They weren't here to win. They were here to feed. And the tomb was still hungry. The chamber was silent now, except for the ragged sound of the soldiers' breathing. Every man still alive clung to what little light remained, 2 dim beams flickering like dying stars in an endless night. Their weapons hung useless in their hands. The sergeant's face was ashen, his jaw locked tight as though he was biting back the same panic threatening to rip through all of them. "Fall back," he whispered. Though the word sounded hollow in the tomb, his men hesitated, exchanging fearful glances. None of them wanted to move. Not deeper into this place, not closer to the black, but the sergeant pointed back toward the tunnel they'd entered from. "We regroup outside now." They formed up quickly, moving as one, their boots crunching on scattered brass casings, rifles trembling in sweaty hands. The surviving lamps cut a narrow path forward, beams slicing through swirling dust. The further they moved from the chamber, the quieter it grew. Even the whispers stopped. For a moment, a fragile thread of hope crept into their chests. Maybe whatever haunted the tomb only lived in the heart of it. Maybe if they reached the tunnel, they could leave this nightmare behind. But when they reached the archway, every trace of hope shattered. The passage they had come through, the tunnel that had led them here, was gone. In its place, a solid wall of rough stone stood, seamless, ancient, as though the path had never existed. "What the hell?" one soldier whispered, running his hand along the cold surface. He pressed his shoulder into it, trying to find some weakness, but the stone didn't budge. He slammed the butt of his rifle against it again and again, each strike ringing uselessly into the air. "This can sit be," another muttered, his voice rising. "This wasn't set." "Quiet," the sergeant snapped, but even he couldn't hide the tremor in his voice. He reached out and touched the wall himself, as though by feeling it he could prove it wasn't real. But it was real, unyielding, and it wasn't there before. They were sealed in. The realization sank through the squad like a knife. The tomb wasn't just haunted, it was alive, reshaping itself around them, trapping them like prey in a cage. One soldier lost it. He screamed and fired his rifle point blank into the stone, the rounds sparking off the wall with no effect. He emptied the magazine, dropped it, and slammed another in, his hands shaking so violently he nearly missed the slot. He fired again and again until the weapon clicked empty. The wall didn't even crack. The sergeant grabbed him by the collar and shoved him back, shouting in his face, "Stop it. You'll bring it down on all of us." But deep down, they all knew nothing would come down. The tomb wasn't going to crush them. It was going to bleed them slowly, savoring every scream, every drop of fear. The whispers returned. Faint at first, sliding between the cracks of their thoughts, not the mocking laughter this time, nor the voices of loved ones. These were harsher, older, words in a language none of them knew, but all felt in their bones. The sound reverberated off the walls, growing louder, filling the tunnel until it felt like the air itself was vibrating. One soldier clutched his ears and fell to his knees, blood trickling from his nose. Another doubled over, retching violently as the whispers drilled into his skull. The lamps flickered, shadows dancing wildly on the walls. The tomb was closing in. "Move!" the sergeant shouted, dragging the man on his knees upright. "Find another way out." They stumbled deeper into the tomb, leaving behind the sealed archway. Their boots echoed, their lights cutting frantic arcs through the suffocating dark. The whispers followed them, weaving in and out of their ears, their minds. Then they saw it. Another passage, narrow and crooked, splitting off from the main chamber. It hadn't been there before, or maybe it had, hidden in the dark. Either way, it was their only chance. Without hesitation, they plunged into it, the walls pressing tight around them. The air grew colder, heavy with damp earth and rot. The tunnel sloped downward. Their lamps barely pierced the black, but they could make out carvings etched into the stone, crude shapes worn down by centuries. Human figures bowed before towering creatures with twisted faces. Soldiers brushed past them quickly, not daring to linger, but each carving seemed to move in the corner of their eyes, the stone mouths twitching as though whispering along with the voices. One soldier stopped, staring too long at a carving. "It's Seps watching me," he muttered. "It's Seps looking right at me." "Keep moving," the sergeant barked, shoving him forward. But the man looked back and screamed. His light dropped to the ground as he vanished into the wall itself, like the carving had swallowed him whole. The others froze in terror, staring at the blank stone where their comrade had stood seconds before. His lamp lay flickering on the floor, beam pointed uselessly at the ground. The sergeant didn't waste time. He yanked the lamp up and kept moving, dragging the survivors with him. "Don't look at them. Eyes forward," he barked. His voice cracked, but it was all they had left. The passage stretched on, twisting and narrowing, until the soldiers felt the walls pressing in on their shoulders. Their breathing came fast and shallow. Sweat soaked their uniforms, freezing instantly in the tomb's chill. One man began muttering prayers under his breath, repeating them like a broken record. Finally, the passage opened into another chamber. It was smaller than the first, but worse, so much worse. In the center of the room stood a stone altar, dark stains coating its surface. Shackles hung from the sides, rusted but still strong. Bones littered the floor, not ancient dust but fresh, clean white, picked bare, some still glistening with scraps of flesh. The soldiers stopped dead, their stomachs churned, bile rising in their throats. The whispers surged louder, swirling like a storm. It wasn't random anymore, it was chanting, a rhythm, a ritual. And then the lamps began to die. One by one, their beams dimmed until only a single light remained. Shaking in the sergeant's trembling hand, shadows crept closer, circling them like wolves. The men huddled together, rifles raised, though they knew it was useless. "This is it," one soldier whispered, tears streaking down his face. We stirred not, getting out. The sergeant's jaw tightened. His eyes, hollow but defiant, locked on the altar. He knew the truth. They hadn't stumbled here by accident. They had been lured, brought to this place for a reason. The tomb hadn't trapped them. It had chosen them. The chanting never stopped. It rolled through the chamber like thunder, shaking dust from the ceiling, crawling beneath their skin. The soldiers pressed their backs together, rifles up, eyes darting into the shadows that seemed alive, breathing, waiting. The sergeant's single lamp shook violently in his grip, the pale beam twitching across the altar and the walls carved with twisted faces. Every shadow seemed to lean closer, inch by inch. Then, the beam caught something. At the far end of the chamber, carved into the wall itself, was a massive stone doorway. Its edges were lined with strange runes that pulsed faintly, as though they were alive. The soldiers froze, their fear giving way to grim realization. The chanting was coming from there, from whatever waited on the other side. One soldier whispered, "That's Sepsit, the heart of it. That's Sepsit's where this ends." But another shook his head violently, his face pale. "No, we can sit, open that. We open that, we sit dead." The Sergeant Sip's voice cut through, steady but hollow. "We Sips are already dead if we stay here." His eyes flicked to the altar. "You think it's Sips going to let us walk away? You Sips seen what it does?" The men exchanged glances. Their fear was absolute, but so was their desperation. One by one, they nodded. They would face whatever waited behind the door. The sergeant approached the ruined doorway, lamp shaking in his hand. The carvings seemed to writhe as he neared, their grotesque faces twisting in mockery. The air grew thick, choking, as if the tomb itself was warning him not to continue. He reached out and placed his hand on the stone. It was warm. The runes flared, glowing blood red. The chanting surged louder, deafening, until the soldiers clamped their hands over their ears. The ground shook violently, dust raining from above, bones rattling across the floor. The altar split down the middle with a crack that echoed like a gunshot. And then the door opened. Not with a groan, not with the grinding of ancient stone, but with a silence so deep it swallowed every sound. The chamber went still. The chanting stopped. From the doorway poured a darkness thicker than the tomb itself, a living black that swallowed the lamplight whole. It spread across the floor like smoke, creeping toward the soldiers. The men backed away, rifles raised, but their weapons looked useless, pitiful, against the oncoming tide. Then, a figure stepped through. At first, it looked human, a tall, thin silhouette wrapped in tattered robes, face hidden beneath a cracked, featureless mask. Its movements were slow, deliberate, like a puppet pulled by invisible strings. But as it stepped fully into the chamber, the mask tilted, and the soldiers realized with horror that the cracks in it weren't cracks at all. They were mouths. Dozens of tiny mouths, whispering in unison, echoing the same words that had haunted the tomb. One soldier screamed and opened fire. Bullets tore through the figure, holes ripping in its robes. But instead of falling, the figure split apart. Dozens of arms unfolded from within, pale and thin, stretching impossibly long. The mouths on its mask screamed in unison, and the sound was like glass shattering inside their skulls. The man who fired first dropped instantly, clutching his head, blood pouring from his ears. His body convulsed violently before going still, eyes wide open. The others panicked. Some fired wildly into the darkness, others dropped their rifles and backed away. The chamber erupted into chaos, muzzle flashes lighting the horror in brief, stuttering glimpses. The figure's arms whipped through the air, striking with inhuman speed. One soldier was yanked off his feet and dragged screaming into the darkness, his cries cut short with a wet crack. Another's chest was pierced clean through, his body lifted and flung across the chamber like a rag doll. The sergeant roared orders, but his voice was drowned out by the screams. His lamp fell to the ground, rolling in frantic circles, its beam flashing across the carnage. Everywhere, shadows moved, reaching, grabbing, tearing. The survivors huddled closer, firing until their weapons clicked empty. The air stank of blood, gunpowder, and something else. Something foul and ancient, like rot carried on the wind of another world. And then silence again. The soldiers looked around. The figure was gone. The chamber was empty, save for the altar and the bones. But their squad was nearly gone too. Only 3 men remained standing, pale and trembling, their rifles empty. The sergeant among them, his face gray with exhaustion and despair. "Reload," he said. Though his voice cracked, his hands shook as he fumbled for another magazine. But even as they reloaded, they knew it didn't matter. Because the whispers had returned. This time they came from inside their own heads. The voices of their families, their friends, even their own voices, whispering terrible things. One soldier dropped his rifle and began clawing at his ears, screaming that he could feel something crawling inside. Another fell to his knees, sobbing, whispering that he couldn't fight anymore, that it was too strong. The sergeant grabbed him by the collar, shaking him violently. "Stay with me. You hear me? We're not done yet." But even as he said it, the floor beneath them cracked, a jagged line split through the chamber, glowing faintly with that same blood-red light. The altar collapsed into it, bones tumbling into the abyss. From the crack rose a sound, not a chant, not whispers, but a scream. A scream so vast and ancient, it shook their very souls. The sergeant staggered back, staring into the widening chasm. Shapes moved within it, writhing, clawing, straining to break free. He realized the tomb wasn't just a prison for the dead. It was a seal, a barrier, and they had just broken it. The ground gave way beneath them. The sergeant's last sight was of his remaining men being pulled into the abyss, their faces frozen in terror as the darkness swallowed them whole. He tried to hold on, gripping the edge of the cracked stone with bleeding hands. The whispers roared in his ears, promising power, promising salvation, promising an end to fear if he would just let go. For a moment, he resisted, but the stone crumbled beneath his fingers. And then he fell. When the recovery team finally arrived weeks later, they found nothing. No squad, no weapons, not even signs of a struggle. The tomb itself had collapsed, its entrance sealed under tons of stone. The locals who guided the recovery team refused to step closer, muttering prayers, warning that the soldiers had angered something ancient that had slept for centuries. They said the earth had swallowed them, not by accident, but by judgment. The Americans searched for days, turning over rubble, scanning the mountain with equipment. All they found were fragments of broken stone and a scattering of bones so old they turned to dust at the touch. And yet, at night, the men swore they heard voices, not carried by the wind, not echoes in the valley, but whispers inside their own tents. In English, voices calling their names, sometimes in the tones of their comrades, sometimes in the tones of loved ones back home. The commander dismissed it as nerves, exhaustion, but one by one the men grew restless. Some refused to sleep, some refused to stay near the ruins at all, and one morning a soldier was gone, his rifle left behind, his bedroll undisturbed. His footprints ended at the mouth of the rubble, as if he had walked willingly into the stone itself. The mission was abandoned soon after. The site was marked on maps as unstable, too dangerous for excavation. The official report stated the missing squad had been lost to a cave-in, a tragedy, but not unusual in such treacherous terrain. But the men who had been there, who had heard the whispers, they knew better. They never spoke of it, not publicly, yet some of them carried it with them to their graves. Waking in the night, sweating, swearing, they could still hear it, that same endless chant. And to this day, locals still refuse to go near that cursed valley. They say at night, if you listen closely, you can hear the voices beneath the earth. Some say it's the soldiers, trapped forever in the tomb they should never have opened. Others say it's something older, something waiting, something that remembers the names of every man who dared disturb its sleep.